Welcome back to Dukascopy TV. I'm Darren McDermott. Well, today I have Michael Hopkins in the studio, and he is the CEO and founder of the CSR and Financial Institute. Today we're going to have a look at the labour markets, and Michael is currently trying to create 1 million jobs in Somalia. So Michael, good morning and welcome to the studio.
Good morning.
So why is there so much unemployment in the world?
Now, why is unemployment, why has it been rising in recent times? A lot of it is because, in quoting the famous British economist John Maynard Keynes, who wrote his general theory of employment in the 1930s, essentially there's not enough effective demand for workers. Well, that sounds obvious, there's no demand for you. But why is there not? Why is sometimes there's enough demand and sometimes there's not? And it does seem in recent years that unemployment has been persistent, much more than before. Well, what's happened is that we've had a big recession caused by a lot of reasons, but the banking crisis led to that. And normally in a recession, Maynard Keynes would recommend counter-cyclical policies, which would be increased government expenditure. But at the same time, we've had countries, especially in the United States, but also elsewhere in Europe, saying that we shouldn't let our government expenditure get too high. So the deficit should be a reasonable amount. In the European community, it's got to be around 3%. And this is kind of a law, an iron law, but where does it come from? Now, unless you increase government expenditure during a recession, unemployment is going to persist. Now, what happens is that if the recession continues, then the proportion of government expenditure of the whole income of a country starts to go down. So the deficit actually gets more of a problem. So what you need to do is to stimulate growth, and governments can do that by raising expenditure on all sorts of things. Companies can do that as well, but companies have been hoarding cash because there's not enough people with enough money to buy their products. So you've got this kind of continuing recession. So the way to get out of it, as Keynes said, is to increase government expenditure.
And looking at some projects you have been working on, can you tell us about them?
Yeah, they've been quite diverse. One of the biggest issues in the world, of course, is youth employment from the ages of 18 to 35. And the problem with the youth employment is that kids coming onto the labour market looking for a job, they might have good education, but they don't have experience. And so this is awful for young people, because they're going to look for jobs and people say, oh yeah, but where's your experience? And you say, I can't get a job. How can I get experience if I can't get a job? Yeah. So what's happened, there are more and more schemes to actually get people into the labour force through internships and so on. And then there's a whole issue, should we pay interns? But then people need to earn money. So I've been looking at that around the world. And the problem, of course, is very different. I mean, we're just talking kind of generally across the world. I worked in Qatar, for example, and I helped set up, and I wrote the basic background work for setting up something called Silatech, S-I-L-A-T-E-C-H, which was actually the brainchild of Sheikh Musa, the emir at that time's wife, who also runs a Qatar foundation. And she said, youth employment, let's do something about it. She's a wonderful lady. She's really interested in social issues and so on. And she said, well, let's look at, why can't we in Qatar? We have enough money. Let's try and help all these young people who are unemployed. So they hired me and my team to actually think about what they could do. And her advisor said, well, let's just concentrate on youth employment in the Middle East. I said, okay, what's wrong with the whole world? I mean, let's look at it, because a lot of similar issues. So we wrote the background paper for that in Qatar, had a number of seminars on what to do. And we also visited a number of countries to look at what they were doing, because the Qataris said, well, you know, what about call centers? So we sent us to India. Oh, wonderful. And then they said, well, what about small and medium-sized enterprises? We went to Tunisia. And where else did we go? And it was the third country we went as well, to actually study what was going on and come back and report to the Qataris. And they set up with about $100 million Silatech. I wanted at least $1 billion. moving on to Somalia, you kindly mentioned that. Somalia, all you hear about is kind of gloom and doom and terrorism and all sorts of things. But a lot of that stems from disaffected youth who, one, don't have any education. You know what it's like talking to someone without zero education? You know, I'm a university professor. I find it hard talking to undergraduates. Sorry, folks, sorry. No, not really, but people without education, and they're very easily led astray. And a lot of that, I think, is what's happening. And it's not really about religion. It's about power and money, as all these things are. What I want to do is to get those kids in school. But the problem is that a lot of them are not 5 or 6 years old. I mean, some of them are 30, 35 years old with zero education. They don't want to go to primary school with a bunch of young kids. So they've got to be special schools where they can learn basic education and learn some skills that they can use in their local communities. And then the other problem is they can't go to these schools without a little bit of money. So we've got to pay them a bit of money. I worked out a couple of dollars a week, and the whole program would cost about $500 million. Well, the international, $500 million, the government expenditure in a year is only 100 million, but then you hear 15, $20 billion are being spent to curb piracy, of which some of these young people are involved in. Mm-hmm. So there is money there, but very rarely for social projects, unfortunately. And that's the key. Our world, it seems to be, is very, very quick to put in military solutions to problems and not to actually look at the social causes of this. And enormous money goes into military, and it can be approved overnight. Mm-hmm. A social project like this one, well, I've been working on it for 8 months. Michael, why don't you just try a pilot study? Why don't you just do it for a few? I mean, this is urgent stuff, mm-hmm. but I find that kind of frustrating, and it's kind of tricky as well because you need so many things, much more tricky than just sending in a bunch of arms or a few drones and so on. So we need to change our thinking about employment and how to deal with it.
Michael, a few years back you wrote a report turning black gold into human gold. Can you tell me about this?
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is work that we did in Azerbaijan, mm-hmm. which has always been oil rich, but a few years back it discovered in the Caspian Sea an awful lot of oil. And its government revenue was doubling every year. Unbelievable. Well, you've seen things like the Eurovision Song Contest now in Azerbaijan and all sorts of other things. It's getting incredibly rich. But they have a problem of unemployment. And in fact, we looked around the world and we found 55 countries in the world that export a single resource and dominates their country. It's called the Dutch disease. The technical thing is what happens is that if you have a single resource and you export it, so you get floods of money coming in, so you get incredibly rich. However, unemployment rises because all the other products that people are doing, your tomatoes and so on, you might as well import them because they're cheaper anywhere else because your currency goes up. So that's called the Dutch disease. So unemployment starts to rise rapidly. Well, what many countries do, in the Gulf, for example, they put them all into government employment. And Azerbaijan was doing that as well. But the thing is, what we did is and I thought of this phrase, turning black gold into human gold, which is the only way that in a highly expensive economy to actually get people to get jobs is that they need high skills to go along with the high wages. It's no good paying people high wages if they're growing tomatoes because Iran next door can compete with them and other countries can compete with agricultural products. So what they've got to do is a massive investment in human skills. So that was the human gold. So what we said, we're turning black gold into human gold, raising the level of education and skills massively so you can employ people in much higher level earning jobs, highly skilled intensive jobs than they have before. It's working to a certain extent. My dream was actually to do it for all the youth in the country. The president has taken this on board and he's done quite a lot of work on that. And I hope when I go there in a couple of weeks' time to see where we are. But that's black gold to human gold. You can also do it elsewhere. Botswana is an example of a very, very successful country in Africa. Its main single resource export are diamonds, as you know. And they're doing a pretty good job in actually investing money in skills. And I've been there several times talking about skill development. Very, very professional, very interesting.
Thank you very much, Michael. As always, a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Well, viewers, if you enjoyed this interview, then make sure you tune back to Dukascopy TV for more like it. But for now, goodbye.